Well, I've already covered the bottom wing, and I found a kind of a Rube Goldberg tripod. So we'll try to videotape doing the top of the wing. So I've already cut the piece to fit, and I also tack rigged the wing, the ribs. So like we did in the bottom, I start out by ironing it down at the edge of the ribs, and I'm doing the center section. I did the bottom first. So I tack it down with the iron first. And then I'll come back with my trim iron on high to really lock it into place on these ribs. And the tripod might not catch all of this, I'm not sure. We'll do the best we can to give you an idea of what we're doing here. So so it's tacked in place on both these side ribs at the end of the panel. So I'm just going to go over it with my Ultracote or my Coverite trim iron on high, just to really lock it down on these ribs before we start working the rest of the wing. So I cut the pieces to fit. I use a piece of glass in straight edges, of course, to cut the covering to fit. This again is Ultracote Transparent Red Light. I try to cut the covering just to fit, maybe 1/8 of an inch of overlap on both sides. This particular piece I've actually cut a little bit shorter, but I think it'll work out fine. One thing I forgot to mention earlier, I use this Deluxe Materials cover grip. It's kind of like the old, what was it, balsa balsa, it was the same thing you put on to make your adhesive stick. Well, you can't buy that, but this you buy. So what I do is I use a small foam brush, and I put it on, in this case on the Purito. The only thing I do is just the leading edge carbon pieces. So that's been done. It's a water base. You can clean it up pretty easy as well. Balsa Right, that's the name of the stuff from years ago. All right, so it's tacked in place on the edges. So what I'm going to do is start with the iron in the middle section. And I'm really just going to do kind of the center section only. Now I'm going to run down the top of these ribs while pulling at the trailing edge. And I know I've talked about the cover tugger. In this case, I don't need it, or I can't. It's easier just to use my fingers on this. So we'll just go around and work across the top of all of these ribs. And then that locks the covering in again on the tops. All right. So I got the right side of the panel done. So now we'll come over and we'll do the same thing on the left. And I know I shared with you on another video the heat settings that I typically use on the iron. On my Coverite iron, it says 250 degrees. I know it's not because I work with a sock. I don't remember what it was. I'll try to post a picture in the video. You can see here I'm working just that inch or two wide portion of the ribs. And at this heat setting, it shrinks pretty good. You don't have to really pull it to get everything super tight. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going back to the center section, and from the section that I already laid down, I'm going to pull at the trailing edge and work the covering down. And the one thing I found over the years, let the iron shrink the covering. And in certain cases, when you're doing fuselages and you're trying to work it around corners of the fuselage, the easiest thing to do is to heat the covering when it's not contacting the fuselage. And while it's heated, then pull it around the edge of your, whether it's a wingtip or whether it's a fuselage. So anyways, there's the center done, ironed. So now I'm going to work towards the trailing edge and just do the small section of the trailing edge and the ribs. Lock it in place. All right, so that's pretty good. I'm going to go back and do the left-hand side of the wing. The trailing edge, and I'd say about an inch of the ribs. Again, just pulling by hand. And my way isn't the only way to do this. There's all kinds of covering methods and tips. I'm just showing you, this is what works for me, especially on like an open air structure like this Purito wing. All right, so there I've got the trailing edge covered, the center is covered, and the top maybe inch of the ribs, the iron is ironed it down, adhesive onto that. So now, this is the hard part when you're doing a one-piece wing. All right, so there we've turned it around. I'm working on a cardboard box with some foam. And now what we're going to do is work this center section towards the leading edge. And just work slow, let the iron heat it. I also find that having a lot of lights in your shop can help tell you if it's ironed down or if you got a wrinkle. If you got a wrinkle, you can just keep heating it with the iron. All right, so that's pretty good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pull at the leading edge and work probably the leading edge about a ½ inch, 3/4 of an inch of the ribs and the leading edge carbon fiber to lock it. And you'll notice on the wing there's a lot of wrinkles. Don't worry about it at this point at all. So we want to make sure that the covering is locked in place at the side, at the ribs where we started, and also at the leading edge and the trailing edge. That's before we do any further shrinking. And I don't find that I really need to use a heat gun other than when I do wing tips and try to get the covering around the wing tips. So everything is done with really 3 irons. I've got the normal Coverite iron, and I've got the Coverite trim iron, and I use a sock on all of them. So we'll go back, and now we're going to do the right hand side of the panel. Same thing, just work the leading edge down to the carbon. And from the previous, I took a bunch of pictures of the bottom, but it's overlap. The covering on the bottom is overlapped just to, it'd be like the top of the carbon fiber. And with that, the covering stuff from Deluxe, I find that it really locks in place. It's not going to pull off. Because carbon isn't maybe the best thing to try to iron covering onto, but it works all right. We used to be able to buy the Balsarite stuff, and they stopped producing it years ago, I think, too. So you notice the wing is moving around. Sometimes I actually put weights with a towel, something to hold it so it's not going to pull off the bench. But that's pretty much, it's done that quite well. All right, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go along the leading edge carbon fiber with my trim iron on high while pulling, but this is really just to really lock it in place against the carbon and the covering. The bottom covering I'm talking about that was overlapped. It's coming along pretty good. Now I'm going to turn the wing around. We'll lock the trailing edge in before we get my other iron. It's set a little bit hotter. I think it's about 260 degrees Fahrenheit, measured on the sock. This looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'll go right at the trailing edge with this iron and lock it right against the trailing edge. And what I'm showing you here will work on the rest of the wing panels on the Purito or any other open structure glider or any other, whether it's a covered structure. I always start by, on a covered wing or a fully sheeted wing, I would tack it in place right where the wing panels join together, and then I'll go down about the center, the high point of the ribs, all the way from the center section all the way within about 5 inches of the wingtip, and then do the same thing. I pull towards the leading edge first, then I'll do the trailing edge. So now I've got a trusty old iron. This is the one that's set at about 270, and I'll just lay it on the wing and let it do its magic. Move it slowly over the wing, and this stuff will shrink rather well. I'll do the leading edge on the right, then I'll do the leading edge portion on the left, and then we'll come back and we'll work the trailing edge. It's amazing how this stuff shrinks with the iron turned up. All right, I think you can see me good. So I'm going to go ahead and do the trailing edge portion of this panel as well. So there, I'm just working back and forth. I like 2 ribs at a time. Now I'm going to do this center where the spoiler bays are. I really like this Ultracote Lite as well. It's nice stuff to work with. The regular Ultracote Transparent is too. But it's amazing how flexible it is and how well it sticks. And if you've got anything that's not shrunk 100%, it'll do it here. All right, so now we'll go ahead and we're going to work the left-hand panel same way. Make sure this is in the viewfinder yet, that you can see it. All right, so we'll do the same thing. Tops of these ribs. We still may have some wrinkles along the leading edge. So I'm going to shrink this up as best as I can without turning the wing around, and then we'll work the leading edge before we cut any of this material off or trim it. All right, so we're going to come back, work the trailing edge. And I'm not forcing this iron down at all. All it's doing is just coasting over the ribs. Let it slide nice over the ribs, and it's doing the magic shrinking this stuff. pretty cool. I think I'll do another video when I get to wing tips. That might help our new builders and guys covering. All right, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to turn it around. We'll lock in the leading edge, and then I can trim it. And that's good. Try to turn the wing around without knocking it into something. All right, so you can see that this is still wrinkled. It's wrinkled here. Some small wrinkles, nothing too bad. So we'll work, I'm gonna work from in the outboard portion. And at this point, I'm tugging on the covering at the leading edge. I don't think it's really loose, but I hold on to it. If you see a stubborn wrinkle in between the ribs at the leading edge, just leave the iron there. Work it back and forth. It'll shrink. All right, that's taken care of that left panel. This right panel looked pretty good. So we'll just work the leading edge of all the ribs towards the carbon fiber leading edge. And actually this shrunk down nice. And some of this, I may not even want to do a final shrinking until I get the other cover on the panels. That'll help to lock it in place as well. But that looks pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is just run the shoe right down that carbon fiber. And again, this is set measured at the shoe about 270 degrees Fahrenheit, which is really going to liquefy the adhesive and lock it in place. The last thing you want to do is start shrinking something and it's not locked in at the leading edge or trailing edge. All right, that concludes the covering of the top section. I'm going to go ahead and trim it up, cut the bays out for the spoilers, and then cover the spoilers. Hope that helped.